And he said to them, "Well then, every scribe who becomes a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a householder who brings out from his storeroom things both new and old." The Gospel of the Lord. Since my ordination to the priesthood a few years ago, Pope John Paul II, now Saint John Paul II, has become quite a spiritual companion of mine on my journey. And he's somebody who I return to time and again for wisdom and discernment. He had quite a long life with significant key moments. But one of the key moments particularly is that he led the church over the threshold and into a new millennium, into the third millennium. And you'll be pleased to know that I was still in school at the millennium. I worked it out on my fingers and toes. I was 14. And so I don't remember much about that millennium time. The only two things I remember is that firstly, that I watched the Titanic on New Year's Eve, and I thought I was really grown up because we were allowed to stay up late, and also the millennium bug, because I think some of us are still going through tins of tuna, aren't we, from that panic buying. And while I was young at the time, too young to appreciate what was going on, it's something that I've since gone back to and looked at and reflected upon a bit. At the beginning of this new millennium, Pope John Paul II issued the world with a letter, an apostolic letter. And I'm not even going to attempt to try and pronounce the Latin name, but it's quite catchily called At the Beginning of the New Millennium. I don't know where they get these titles from. One author for this letter is a very well-written letter to the world, lots of beautiful things inside. And one of the commentators of the letter at the time described it as Pope John Paul II's manifesto for the new millennium. He described it as sort of looking ahead to the priorities that will stand us in good stead as we move forward over this threshold and into the new millennium with a new expectant hope. And the centre point of all our endeavours, the Holy Father will say in this apostolic letter, is of course the conviction that Jesus Christ is the centre of everything. And he says this, he reflects, Christ is the foundation and centre of history. He is its meaning and ultimate goal. The Son we orientate our lives around is the Son of God, made incarnate, the Word becoming flesh and dwelling among us. And so every other manifesto priority of John Paul II, as he reflects in that document, in that letter to the world, finds its source here, that Christ is the foundation and centre of history. And it is from this source that towards the end of the letter, the Holy Father issues us with a very famous invitation, one which comes from the scriptures themselves. He says to go out, put out into the deep, duc in altum, a refrain that the Pope used time and again during his pontificate. The Gospel today speaks of those people who risk it all to experience the treasure that somebody finds in the field. If we have a look at the Gospel in the newsletter, what does the Gospel writer tell us he did? He sells everything that he owns and buys the field. Or let's just have a look at what goes on next. The merchant. The Gospel says that he goes and sells everything he owns. Our Christian vocation demands our everything. that we put God first, above and before all things. This is easy to say, isn't it? And it's easy to make that pinky promise at our baptisms or our confirmations. But it's something totally different to bring it to reality when faced with the challenges that the world throws at us. Our discipleship cannot be seen in the same way we look at other hobbies, believing that a minimum will be sufficient enough for us to get by. The reality of the good news demands our everything. And this is what the Holy Father asks us to consider and think about in that letter to the world at the threshold of the new millennium. He desired that we revive in ourselves that ardour and longing for the person of Jesus Christ, for that intimate and personal relationship with him who is the centre and the foundation of our history. The Holy Father desired that we approach the proclamation of the person of Jesus with a renewed spirit, with a renewed zeal and thirst. And if it is true that Christ is the foundation and centre of our history, then of course it does make sense for us to risk it all, doesn't it? To risk it all and to offer our everything in return. And I think the readings this weekend provide us with that space to be able to do that, to discern. Look back to the first reading of King Solomon, praying for that discerning heart. This holiday time does not have to be about abdicating our lives of faith, placing them to one side, or our spiritual journeys to give ourselves a break, because this doesn't make much sense. Rather, in making space, which we do during this holiday time, in taking the foot off the accelerator, in spending quality time with our families, in assessing perhaps or reassessing our own priorities, our own goals for the future, our new aspirations of what could lie ahead. This holiday time has a chance to be sanctified, to be set apart, so that it can truly be holy days. Taking the risk enables us to grow. Are you prepared to risk it all for the sake of the kingdom? Amen.